Hello everyone, this is Adam Lesser, and this is my Module 10, Bully Prevention Through Environmental Changes for AED 880. When looking at the articles provided, I kind of broke stuff up into a couple of slides. I found that it would have been very easy to keep adding much more information about these, but this helps kind of break up and move forward through a few things. For our first one from Loveless, we were looking at just a couple of things that actually help ensure that the positive learning environment was being created within the schools. And one of the big justifications for that is that that's actually going to allow both academic success for students, but also just for them to be able to feel a climate of safety, and just to feel like they belong in a place, and they feel like they're in a situation where they can take risks and they can have these actual conversations with each other, and know that they're not going to be criticized just for speaking their own truths or for sharing their opinions on any sort of thing. One of the things that I greatly appreciate about this article is it actually gave steps for ensuring this would happen. I found that a lot of things, especially when I was doing my own research, they would mention a couple of things and say, well, you should have a better work environment, and then not provide any steps for it. So I greatly appreciated that this article actually helped us out with that. And the two that stuck out to me the most were developing intrinsic motivation for students, and including them in that, and then, of course, having relationships be actually first in school, and then the academic side, or the school side, if you will, being second. And I think that's something that's very difficult for a lot of teachers, especially starting out, to be able to consider. You know that that's an important part of the job, but then you're also worried about, okay, my administration judges me so much on if my kids are meeting the academic standards or whatever else might be happening. And it's hard to focus so much on the relationship side, even though it pays such dividends down the line. The next article that we'd like to talk about here is the one from Sparks in 2016, titled How Feeling Respected Transforms a Student's Relationship to School. And really, this kind of started to match on those stereotypes, or how just their, like I said, their perspective is going to have a big impact on their learning while they're with us. And I think the top point on that is honestly probably the biggest one, that they are going to be losing respect when they feel like they are being disciplined in a way that's just putting them down, that's just embarrassing in front of their students, and they're going to be more likely to act out as a result. I think it's fairly natural for that consequence to happen. Even with adults, if we get yelled at by our administrators, we're not going to treat them the same way as we had before. Even if we're trying to, we'll probably intrinsically make some different choices or changes than we would have otherwise. And then one of the other big things is that stereotypes can make such a large impact on this. That if you're calling a kid a troublemaker, or if you are thinking that they are going to be causing issues before you even meet the kid, well, more likely they're going to live up to your expectation because you're putting them into that situation. But again, this kind of is tying together a theme. Relationships are a big thing here to help ensure that students are actually in a safe environment and that bullying is not as prevalent. Moving forward here for the next one, creating a warm and inclusive classroom environment, planning for all children to feel welcome. Again, we're starting to see a theme that just building the environment around the kids so that they feel safe is going to be a very important thing. And a big part of that is to teach self-advocacy and self-determination directly to them. We kind of, as teachers, it's natural for us to try to address these other things while we're learning content curriculum, and there's nothing wrong with including it. But they also, a lot of times, need that direct instruction. Sometimes you just need to be straightforward with them and say, this is how you advocate for yourself. If you're feeling one thing or another, these are resources that you can use to be able to work with that. And I think the last point on here specifically to me speaks out the most. We need to just reach them where they're at. It's foolish for us to believe that all of our students, their parents, are going to have all these background skills taught to them. In some cases, it will be true. In some cases, there's hardly any background skills that seem to be taught to them. So we really need to meet them where they're at to be able to make sure that we're in a positive working environment and they're in a positive learning environment. The last one on here, I kind of struggled with feeling the connection myself, since I am not an administrator, nor do I really want to be an administrator in the future. But it is also kind of interesting just to approach it from that perspective, the 3 essential priorities for school principals. And one of the things I really appreciated specifically about this article, because I know you can read the stuff that's already on the screen, but I really appreciated how it talked about working with the staff members and the adults to ensure that there's a positive community within that space, because that will certainly have an impact on the students. If we as adults can't get along with our other coworkers, then, well, why do we expect kids to do anything differently? And of course, the last part on there, collaborating with community partners and seeking them out if necessary. That's something that I feel like would be difficult in some cases, but then I also know there's community members that are wanting to have some input with the schools or wanting to be helping out the schools themselves. And I think that right now in our current climate, there's a lot more that we could be doing together with them in order just to help have this positive learning environment. As far as articles that I researched, I tried to keep things a little bit simple and just provide some other additional resources with it. So a few of these are like the main articles, but there's other things that are going to be added to it. The first one, though, is just an article by itself, so 6 ways educators can prevent bullying in schools. Like I said earlier, one of the big things I appreciate about some of these were that it actually gives you some steps or some plans or some things you can actually implement in your classroom, aside from just knowing the end goal. Because I think that's something that can help us out more immediately as we're working towards that goal each and every day. So for the first one, the 6 ways educators can prevent bullying in schools, a lot of this was talking about teaching kindness and empathy within the courses themselves and having that be something that is consistently structured into whatever they're going to be learning. The other big thing is that, kind of like we mentioned before, the bullying between teachers can be a real problem. It's interesting that, we are, as teachers, the adults in the room, but we still kind of live up to the high school approach in some ways. And that's something that, as an adult community, we can continue to work on. The next one, going down, bullying prevention. One thing that I felt like was somewhat lacking in the provided sources, or something that could use additional resources to help, was looking at cyberbullying specifically. That's something that I feel like is becoming more prevalent, and it kind of includes other types of bullying as well, whether it's sexual harassment or exclusion or anything along those lines. But it is something that I feel like even kids aren't as quick to report because they don't feel like it's a school place to do that. And I think that's one of the big things from this bottom article that we're looking at, is that if it's happening between school individuals, much less on school time, it is something that we need to be aware about, and we need to be working with our parents to help educate them on how to combat it and how to provide students with resources or even just the support to be able to talk to us about it. Another thing that I've seen through a few articles, but restorative justice is a big thing that I feel like could help out in this situation specifically. At just having the kids kind of learn that empathy with what's truly going on there and not hiding behind the anonymity of having a screen name or anything to that effect. Moving forward, both of these 2 articles are things that have a lot more other links associated with it. For the first one, teaching students to prevent bullying, this is actually from the NEA website. And they mention how bullying is the biggest discipline problem in middle schools. But one thing that I kind of appreciated from it was the 3-step strategy, the stop, walk, and talk. Essentially, that's what they're teaching kids, is to stop the issue or to speak up against it, to walk away, and to talk to somebody else. And I think that keeping things simple for them, especially if it's a middle school environment, just provide them a good framework to be able to work with. But like I said, that website, and that's linked in my references here, provides a lot of good resources and a lot of different things you could use for specifics if you're looking at preventing or addressing bullying behaviors in the school. The last one on here, best practices in bullying prevention and intervention. This is from the U.S. government website, and one of the biggest things it talked about was increasing adult supervision in hotspots. So if I'm thinking in my school, I would be thinking around the commons, especially before, after school, during lunch, and then we have a few other kind of hangout areas around the school during our ELO or our seminar period, if you will. We have a school store we call Palmart, and that's a place where naturally kids kind of gravitate towards. And it's tough during that time for us to be supervising that area because we already have kids within our own rooms. So that's something that we constantly have to be aware of, and obviously legally we must be supervising these kids at all times. But knowing and identifying those hotspots can really help make a big difference. Kids are less likely to act out if there's a teacher right in front of them. So it does make quite a big difference. And then the other part on there is kind of some common themes that we've been talking about, shifting school culture, and even just having the kids be more aware of it and calling it out for what it is. That does actually make a big difference. And most importantly, that last part, addressing it in a way that removes peer attention. A lot of these behaviors can be done to seek attention, whether it's positive or negative. Some of these kids just crave any attention whatsoever. So removing at least the justification to continue doing it can have a very large impact. Moving forward, for the data that was provided, I wasn't too surprised by the numbers that were given to us. As far as the bullying actions, it's interesting to see that physical bullying itself, so the actual hitting or pushing or anything along those lines, certainly is common, but not as much as the teasing and name calling. And I think that's because the latter two, teasing and name calling, it's a lot easier to get away with those or to continue doing those without being caught by somebody else or specifically by a teacher. It's very difficult as a teacher in a class of 30, if you have them all talking together, we hope and we circulate trying to ensure that they're on task. And if somebody's across the room, it's easy for us not to catch it. So that certainly makes sense to me. And whereas if it was actually hitting or pushing, that's going to be much more drastic and something that we see right away. The 10% of middle school students being cyberbullied in 2017, it would be interesting to see if that reported number has come up or down since then, even though cell phones and everything were prevalent at that time. It would be interesting to me to see how that trend has been changing throughout the past couple of years. And then for the last part on there, the exclusion and sexual harassment are reported at roughly 25% each. I feel like each of these are things that kids do almost without even thinking about it. I don't want them to be in my group. They're kind of sometimes being more selfish than purposely exclusion, even though that's what it is. And then, to be completely frank, a lot of our TV today is based around sexual harassment. So it kind of makes sense for that to be a larger number as well. Moving down for the bullying hotspots, kind of like I talked about before, just identifying these main areas in the school where you would expect to have issues or where you expect to have kids hanging out more often and ensuring that they are supervised. One of the things that stood out to me is very interesting is that playground and recess times had the lowest percentage. And to an extent, it makes sense. The kids are kind of having the freedom to be able to move around a bit more, and it's not as restrictive. And we know for our kids, sometimes being in an environment where they are in their seats or something to that effect, it can be more frustrating for them and lead them towards acting out. So it kind of supports the idea that kids need a time to stand and stretch. They need a time to decompress. They just need a chance to breathe within our classes, and it's good to work those in, especially if you have longer classes themselves. Moving forward here, though, for results after prevention measures, honestly, I felt like this stuff were kind of the themes that we started to see as we were looking through the different articles. PBIS being a big idea for increasing desired actions and decreasing the negative effects, but ultimately just having school culture change to something that's a little bit more positive, and all these other things starting to support that. As far as my references, these are the references that were provided for us, and these were the ones that I found to be able to add to our discussion here today. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.